So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, based on the time zones you all are coming from. So my name is Neeraj Kheria, and I have been working in this IT industry for more than 14 years now, where I have been leading the global design and development teams for designing enterprise solutions for different industry verticals. So the main goal of the session is to understand how the reactive form is structured. So first thing first, we are going to have a discussion on what is Angular, the introduction to Angular forms, the reactive form versus template-driven forms, and then we are going to have a discussion on how exactly we can create this reactive form setup. If you talk about Angular, so what exactly Angular is? Angular is basically an open source web application framework which is based on TypeScript, which is like a superset of JavaScript, a programming language developed by Microsoft. So this is basically used for designing the single page web application. Just like we have Google Maps, we have Gmail, where we don't have multiple pages. We want the users to simply load a single application, and once they start interacting with the application, then they can start loading different components of the same app that they are going to work with. So that's why it is one of the most popular front-end frameworks maintained and developed by Google. Then it is a complete JavaScript base. So JavaScript is the language of web. So if we are familiar with JavaScript, we can talk to the browser like it is our best friend. And Angular is based on JavaScript and TypeScript, which is like a superscript of JavaScript, like we discussed. And it is mainly used for creating the single page application. So now if you talk about Angular forms, then Angular forms allows us to manage data by sending inputs to the server for processing. So here we can have the section for form control, form group, for form arrays, and for the control value access as well. So if we talk about the reactive forms versus the template-driven forms, then in terms of the comparison factor, so in terms of setup, so you can reactive forms, they are built in within the component class and they are more explicit, whereas the template-driven, they are built within the directives and they are less explicit. And the entire validation is based on functions in reactive, whereas it is based on the directive principles under template-driven forms. Whereas the testing is much easier for reactive forms as compared to template-driven forms here. And again, the data that we are going to create here, it can be changed in template-driven, but again, they are not changeable in reactive forms. And that's why the testing is much easier. We'll be talking about the entire structured component here as we proceed further. So even as a part of our discussion on Angular, so first of all, we discuss on the Angular basics, and then we discuss on Angular components and data binding as a part of again followed by hands-on. Then again, we discuss on data binding and animations, again followed by hands-on. Then we discuss on Angular directives and pipes, again hands-on. Then we discuss on the Angular services and dependency injection, again hands-on. Again, we discuss on RxJS and HTTP line, hands-on. On Angular routes and navigation, hands-on. Then we have Angular forms, and then we discuss about the form validation, and then towards the end, the authentication with JWT and the security modules that we have defined here. So as we had discussed earlier, so we have template-driven, and then we have the reactive forms. So now let's see how exactly we can set it up, one template-driven structure. So for setting up a reactive application, or we can say a React or an Angular application for creating the forms. So as a part of a use case, we are going to create simple reactive form. So this is going to be a registration form, and even going to look at how the validation is going to be defined. So here we can do one thing. Here we can type in ng new, and here we can call the app as, let's suppose, demo app. So ng is basically the command set that we get when we have the npm, and again ng already installed here. So we do want Angular routing, and we want to keep the CSS as a part of the default styling. So if you don't have Angular installed, you can go and install Angular by using the Angular base command here. So there we can define how exactly we can download npm first as a part of Node.js, and then by using npm we can download the Angular package as a part of Angular CLI. So as you can see here, it is currently initializing the entire setup that needs to be done for Angular app. Once this is done, then we will be able to create a demo app. We will switch to this demo app, and then we'll be able to deploy it. And then here we can use ng-serve open. npm start is what we use for React, and ng-serve is what is going to be used for compilation of the current program, the current code. And open is simply going to open this in the browser once it is done. So as you can see here, now we have on localhost on port 4200, we have the Angular application which has been deployed. So this is a default application. So forms mean a page in a web app. So forms is like a component, we can say, Dinakar. It's like a component and that we are going to create. All right. All right. So what we can do is we can open this up, open this project in one of the IDs, like we have VS Code. So we can open up the folder of the project that we have created. So this is the main directory available for the Angular based application. Now, first thing first, we are going to deploy a module as well. So what we can do is for creating a component, or we can say for creating a component under this Angular, we can do one thing. We can simply run the command. So we can open up the terminal here as well. And to install one of the components, we can go ahead and use one statement here as ng G for generate, C for component, and then we can give the component name. Let's suppose here we want to call the component as reactive. So here we can define ng generate component as reactive. So the files required for having a component available, they are also going to be created automatically. So now we can see under app, we have reactive as a component added, and reactive component.css.html.specification and .ts. TS here stands for TypeScript, so they all have been created automatically. Now, once we have the reactive component, so what we can do is we can open up reactive component.ts and we can remove the existing package. And here we can start creating the entire form. So here we can define component. So this is going to be pulled from Angular core. Component always have to be in uppercase. Next, we are going to import the form builder elements. So first of all, we are going to import the form builder. Then we are going to import form group. Then we have validators through which we can validate whatever entry we have done. And then we have this Angular code again. Let's import them from forms. Then we are going to create the component. So here we can define for component. Now here in the component here, first of all, we are going to make use of the selector. So here we define selector as what? As app reactive. And then we can define the template URL. Reactive, and under reactive and then under reactive we have dot component.css, which is going to handle the styling. So here we can define reactive dot component.css. And for the template URL, we can keep it to HTML. And this for CSS. And then we can start by exporting the class. So here we define the class name as reactive component. So here we can define the name as suppose reactive component simply implements on init. So here we are going to find the current export that we are going to use. This is for the reactive component that we are going to create, and this is simply going to implement. It simply implements the on it that we have created. Then we are going to find for registration form as well. So for register form, it is going to be for form group, and then when we can define when this is submitted. If this is submitted, then this is going to be for false. And once we are done with this, so here we are going to make use of constructor. So now we are going to define the user validation itself. That means for multiple forms in a given field, what kind of validation we are going to add. So for example, here this is going to be for the first name, the last name, and the email address that we wanted from the end users. So we'll be having validation for that as well. So for example, here we can define for this dot register form, this dot. All right, so here we are going to simply apply the validation here. So first of all, we are going to define this for register form. So here we can define for register form, and here this is going to be this dot builder dot group, and then within this we are going to simply define this. So within this group we are going to first of all, here we are going to have first name. So first name validation should be what is blank, and then we can define the validator. That means if this is required field, then we can simply keep it as is required. Same way, if we are going to define for last name, so again we can define whatever the value is, whatever the value is going to be, and then we can use validators dot required. So we want these values to be required. Same thing for email. So here we can define now for email we can have two different validations required. So for email, we'll be required to have a basic value entered, and for this, then again we need to have two validators. So here we can define first of all we can use validators dot required, and plus we also want the validation to be done for email address as well. So again, this is going to be validators dot email. That means the value that the users are going to enter, that should be verified as an email address as well. So for example, here we want to define only these terms. So here we can have it set, and then we can simply have the entire setup closed. So we can save it. So this is for the reactive component.ez, whatever we had defined here. All right, so next we have to go back to this reactive component.html to actually create a form. So here we can define whatever form elements we want to be displayed. So for example, first of all, we can create our division class where we are going to find the division class as deflex by using justify content center. Here we can create division for cards for entry, and then we are going to have for h5. So for h5 the class is going to be the card header, and then here we can define the card header suppose as angular reactive form validation as well. And then we can define the division class for again a class body here. So we are going to add the styling part later on. So here we have division class as card body, and then here we can define from form group. Since we have mapped this to register form, if we have noticed, it says we have mapped this to register form. So here we are going to define this for register form itself, like we have for register form. And here we can define what happens on submitting the form here. So again, this has to be put under double quotes. And then we can define what happens when this is submitted. So here we can define ng submit. Now, this action is what we have to create, but again, we haven't defined that yet. So we are going to keep it to none. So no action so far. And then we can define for division class. So this is going to be for a form row. And then we can define again another division class for a form group, and that for a given column. And then we can define a label. Suppose we want the first thing to be, let's say here we can create this for column 5. And then under the first label, as we are talking, here we are going to ask user to enter the user's first name. And then here we can define the input. So the input type is going to be text. And then here we have input type will be text. And then we can define the form control name is going to be first name. Then we have class as form control, and then we can close this division, and then we can open up another division. Same thing for last name, so we can copy this. So instead of first name, this is going to be last name, and under the form control name, this is going to be mapped to last name that we had defined. And then if you want, as you have seen, same way we can have for email as well. And then under the form control name, this is going to be replaced as email. And then once everything is defined in terms of the form row elements and all, so then before we close it, so here what we can do is we can simply policy one thing. Let's close this division first in terms of the row, and here we can create another division as class as text and so here we define division class as text as center, and then we can define button class, suppose as button primary, and then we can add register. can set a temporary button for even for having the reset done. So this is a basic reactive form component, and then we can navigate to our app component.html. Here we can remove everything that we have from here. We can even simply keep it as app reactive. That's it. And then we have to define the router outlet. All right, so once we are done, so next we have to simply open up our app module. And under app module, we have to make sure the reactive component has to be included along with the reactive forms module as well. That also should be imported here. So we can import that. So here we can type in as import reactive forms module also has to be imported. And here we also have to import the normal forms module. Again from Angular Forms. And whatever we are going to include, we are going to declare this as well as a part of app component, reactive component. And then we also going to make use of the CC for now. And then under reactive import, so here we have to import the forms module that we have created. So here, first of all, we have to import the forms module. Then we have to import the reactive forms module. Now, once we are done with this, next we have to open up our index file to add the bootstrap references for the command lines that we have created. Just a moment. We can have CDN available that we can directly copy into our application. So Bootstrap can be integrated with almost anything. So we can copy this. So this has to be updated under our index.html file here just before closing of the head tag. All right, so this is going to be the one that is going to be defined here. And whenever things are going to be saved, so the same thing is going to be visible in the browser. So these are the individual components that we have defined here. And whatever we are going to map this main register form from, so this is going to be mapped accordingly. That's how it is going to be defined. And we have to make sure we do include the same under the app components and the reactive components in the way they have been created so that they can be joined or they can be, or we can say they can be linked together. That's how it is going to be. So that's how we create the reactive forms. And we can wrap it up for today. So first of all, a big thank you to you all everyone for joining today's session. Take care. Bye bye.